All right, it's the end of the session. This is Maru, yes, and this is Maya, and this is the roadmap to success. Maya's smarty, getting a treat. She didn't get as many treats as he did in the video that we just shot. Basically, the problems that we have in this house, where we had a couple. So a lot of barking, that's not the primary issue. The primary issue is someone is marking in the house. And I think a lot of that is related to a lack of rules and structure. Now, I think contributing factors, lack of rules, being petted whenever I want, or on demand. And so when you have dogs that, and also probably under-exercised. So they're not, hey, sweetheart, yes. So they're not super high energy dogs, so they don't need hours and hours of exercise, but the guardians are only walking them a lot less than we'd like to see. So it doesn't need to be a marathon walk, but I'd like to see them both being walked a couple of times a day. We also pulled out a laser, and they like chasing a laser, at least he did. We can also play fetch if they like to play fetch. Some people, if the dogs, if you have stairs, will just take a treat like this and just throw it down the stairs. Dogs run down the bottom of the stairs, get the treat, and then run back up and you throw it again. And that's a great doggy stairmaster. So one of the things I recommend the guardians do is start an exercise journal. Write down the date at the top and write down a column for each dog. And then write down the time and how long the walk was, how many fetches, how many revolutions around the room chasing the laser, whatever it is. The more that we do that, and then at the end of the day, we assign a letter grade, A through F, and then if they got a C, and each dog should have its own independent grade. If one dog gets a C, one dog gets a D, then the next day we give them a little bit more exercise, and then maybe they get a B and a C. Keep on playing around with the elements until eventually we get to the point where both dogs have an A, and then we know what sort of exercise they need. Also, if there's a barking episode or a fight or any sort of problem, write the time down and what happened, as well as anything noteworthy around it. After a while, you start noticing a trend. Every time it's longer than 3.5 hours, they get in trouble. So we're going to start beating the punch. Thank you, sweetheart. You can hold on to that for a while. All right, my little junior assistant here. Okay, now, what else did we go over? We went over rules and structure. And the rules are really important, especially if you have a dog that marks, because a lot of times they mark because they think that they're doing you a solid. They're actually helping you, in their mind, by letting everybody know when somebody comes in there's a male that's in charge around here. And so I want the dogs to adopt more of a follower's mindset. One of the ways we can accomplish that is by incorporating some rules and enforcing them consistently. We as humans have the tendency to think like, look, I'm a human, so you must respect me as the leader. And then I provide you this house and all this stuff. And the dog's like, I didn't see you build the house. Matter of fact, I don't see you really working as far as a dog perceives. And so when we're sitting at the computer doing something really hard, we just look like we're lounging. And also, a lot of us train our dogs to misbehave because for dogs, attention itself is validating. And so if I go and steal the shoe or I steal food from the baby or whatever, and that gets an instant rebuke from the humans, for dogs, a good attention and bad attention, pretty much the same thing. So after a while, we train the dogs to misbehave because that's the easiest way to get our attention. So instead, what I would like the guardians to do is start rewarding the dogs with desired actions and behaviors. I call it petting with a purpose and passive training. Petting with a purpose is when the dog comes up and jumps up on us or on our lap or nudges at us. Instead of asking for attention or rewarding the dog for that, we're going to give it a counter order. Tell it to sit. If it's already sitting, ask it to come and sit over here or lay down. It just has to do something to change its state. And when we pet it, we're just going to say just the command word. I prefer to pet a dog under its shin, and I'm just going to say sit or come or whatever it is that I ask the dog to do. After a while, the dog's going to start sitting in front of us to prepay for attention. When it does that, make sure we do recognize and reward that, and I have a watchword for that. I say recognize or reward. And then the person who's looking at the dog just looks at the dog. If he's sitting, pet him and say sit. If they're laying down, pet him and say crash or chill or whatever your word is. After a while, the dogs will start to offer that to prepay for attention. They'll come and sit in front of you. Now you've taught them a more polite way of asking for attention, sitting to ask for attention, laying down. That leads me to something I call passive training, which is simply recognizing the dog every time it does something you want it to do on its own. So every time that he comes over to me, I'm going to pet him and say, come, especially when I didn't ask or influence him to do that. Every time she lays down, I pet her and say crash or chill or whatever the word is. Every time that they sit, whatever it is. After a while, the dog's like, man, they love it when I sit. As soon as I sit, they're all over me. Now, we're not asking the dog to do it. We're waiting for the dog to do it. And once it does it, then it gets the reward. So the more this happens, the more they will continue to do it. And eventually, if the humans get in the habit of doing it, every time they pet their dogs, it's a micro training session without even thinking about it, every time they pet. Now, we went over some rules to help with flip the leader-follower dynamic, which will help him with his marking. One of the rules is not being allowed to be on the furniture. We're doing this for a video, but after this, don't allow them on the furniture. And not only were they on the furniture, they were up back here. So here is the same height and authority as the humans. Up here is I have more authority than the humans. So once they get to the point where they are allowed in the furniture, it should be with an invitation and never up here or up here. Now, if the dog gets on the furniture without permission, what I would do is create a command word. So I would let the dog see that I have a treat, toss it on the ground, and say off. Off. So anytime the treat goes in the dog's mouth, the treat should go in first, and they should hear the command word immediately after. Now you have 3 seconds to correct or reward a dog for them to have the ability to make the connection. So make sure that you're doing in that 3-second window, especially when they come to you or you're doing petting with a purpose or passive training. Now, one of the rules is they have to be off the furniture. I would throw the first treat down. When the dog gets it and licks it off the floor, we say off. Now at that point, I'm going to block if the dog tries to come back on the couch. But don't stand here like this. Just wait, and as soon as they do, flash your hand and block them. Now, you can also get X pads. You can get those on Amazon or at Chewy or different places online. They're little pads that you lay on the couch and the chair where they have little spikes on them, so it's uncomfortable for dogs to lay on them. And we don't want the dogs to get in the habit of not laying on the furniture. Okay, another rule would be not being allowed to be within 7 feet of a human's eating. Not being, probably be a rule in this house, I would say not being allowed to be on the hardwood floor when we're eating at the table, the baby is eating, or we're preparing food. Now we have a big open floor plan, and so there's a lot of room to go in there, and so we might need to put something as a barricade temporarily. And each time we do this, move it a little bit further away so the opening gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually they see the whole opening, but they still see it as blocked. Now they're going to try to go in. Their job is to push the boundaries. Your job is to not allow it. Now, we have a little one in the house, and the parents are really hardworking, and they have some jobs that they're working really long hours. And so there's only so many hours in the day. It gets frustrating. We don't have time to train our dog all the time. What I like to do when a dog misbehaves, it's a little passive training. When a dog misbehaves, I try to take note, and I ask myself, have I taught the dog how I want it to behave in that situation? If I haven't, then that's really on me. So what I do is I try to recreate that situation, but I remove a couple elements. I want to remove enough elements where the dog can stumble across the right thing, and I get to reward them for doing it. And the other elements are things that are not super desirable. And we want the dog to get into behavior patterns. They practice that again and again. When I have time, when the baby's asleep and the dogs are listening and I have a couple minutes, that's a good time to set them up and practice whatever the activity is. Now, when you practice it, we have people who have studied a lot to get their careers in this house. And so when we learn things, we don't learn them all at once. We learn them in small segments, little steps. We learn a section of a book, then a chapter, and then the text in the book or the section, and so on and so forth. Then we have tests along the way. So for dogs, what I'd like you to do is recreate the situation and help the dog practice the very first step in the easiest capacity possible over and over and over until the dog does it 5 times in a row the first time. Then go to the next step and practice that one until you get that step 5 steps in a row. I thought you went wrong. And keep doing that for each individual step. So now the dog knows how it's supposed to behave through all the steps, but it's in a classroom, it's a practice session. So then what we do is then we start recreating it, making it a little bit more realistic each time until eventually we work our way back up to the real world deal. Now, one of the rules I went over was not being allowed to be in the kitchen when we're eating. Well, when we're eating, we're thinking about eating, and we're hungry, and our attention is split. So when we do things in sports and a lot of activities, we do a warm-up or a practice free throw or whatever it is. Same principle can work great for dogs. So maybe before we actually cook dinner, we go and grab a piece of bacon, throw it on a plate, and microwave it, and we put that bacon out on the table. Dog's like, bacon, that's going to be a strong attractant. So we enforce the boundary. We use those escalating consequences I went over. The third one, marching directly at the dog until they cross the boundary. Then when we walk backwards, take 1 step, pause. 1 step, pause. Or 2 steps, really, pause. And then pause in between each step and walk backwards so your authority is pointed at the dog. And eventually get to the point, yay! Eventually we get to the point where you can get far, all the way back to the far side of the kitchen, and then we pretend like we're cooking. Exactly. And then we clang the dishes, we turn the lighter on the stove, we open the refrigerator, all those sounds are going to be associated with cooking that normally attract the dog to come in. And as soon as the dog breaks the threshold, we stop what we're doing and rush towards the dog. And then we walk backwards again. 1 step, 2, left, right, pause. Left, right, pause. And then recreate it again. And it'll take a couple times, but eventually the dogs will sit or lay down beyond the threshold. Then, once they do that, then you put the bacon away and then do the actual cooking. We help the dog warm up, and we're teaching it how to do each individual step. So you can do that for when you're cooking. You don't do that before you eat. sit down at the table like you normally do, but instead of actually having your meal, just microwave a piece of roast beef. Then split it up and cut it into little pieces. And that's fine. And just for you guys probably be watching this anyways. You're used to it. But basically, we help the dog practice, because when we're eating, again, we're distracted. When you're cooking, we're looking at what we're doing. So by recreating those in individual steps, we can help the dog understand what we want them to do. Now they know how to behave in that activity, and it'll make things much, much easier for you moving forward. Now, let me see, what else did we go over? I went over the 4 escalating consequences. If you forget how to do those, message me. I can send you a video of those. We also, I want the guardians to get in a habit of asking the dogs to come to them rather than going towards the dogs. One of the problems we have is the dogs do not come in from outside. Now, they think that their job is to protect, and we have kind of a busy backyard. There's things that go on back here that cause the dogs to bark, and they think they're defending them. So the rules will help that, enforcing the rules, but we want them to practice being out there. Now, we can also help them practice coming to us. I went over a little exercise in the living room about teaching the dogs to come. When we first do that, we want to be at the same distance that we did when we practiced, about 11 feet apart. But eventually, once the dog starts coming right away, then we would have one person maybe sitting over there by the front door, or sitting in the hallway, or sitting in the stairs. So the dog has to go a little bit further each time, and they're rewarded for doing so. Now, eventually, when the dogs are out in the backyard, what we would do is go out there with a treat and just stand in the middle of the backyard and wait for one of the dogs to come over to you voluntarily. When it does, give them the treat and say, come, then turn around and walk back in the house. A lot of times when we ask the dogs to come, they're having fun outside. When we ask them to come, that represents the end of fun. So if we want 25 steps in the yard to give the treat, then next time we go out 24 steps. Wait for one of the dogs to come near you, give it the treat, and say, come. And then go back in the house. Eventually, within about 3 or 4 steps, times of going back, you'll just go out there and dogs are going to start coming to you. And again, that's the one we want. The leader is the dogs come to the humans for the leader rather than the humans coming to the dog. Now, we can also do things where, so eventually you'll work your way all the way until the dogs come right back to the front door. And then sometimes you throw the treat inside and they come inside and get it and come up with a word for that, say house or casa or whatever. And other times you give them the treat and they get to go back and play. Now, to get them to come when they're barking is much more difficult. I would wait until about a month in. But what I would do then is go out there with a long lead and let one of the dogs out there at a time. When the activities are going on in the backyard, that's going to cause them to want to bark. And then you ask the dog to come. If the dog doesn't come, you can actually pull the leash. Now, we don't want to pull them the whole way, but give them a little bit of a tug and rock it back and forth. And when they come to you, we call it a jackpot. Give them a treat and say, come, come, come. Give them like 5 treats. It's really hard to come away from something that's more interesting. I'm going to transition a little bit. It's really hard to get a dog to come when there's something more interesting that they're playing with. And so sometimes we have to jumpstart that by creating a controlled situation. We have the leash so we can get them coming to us and they can't run away. And eventually, like I said, if we do both of those things, the dogs start coming to us faster and faster and getting rewarded for it. And the more that we pet with a purpose and do passive training, the more the dogs are going to be inclined to want to come for those things as well. So now I showed the guardians how to use the dog bed, and we have one of the dogs using the dog bed. We're going to film that real quick. That's pretty cool. Normally, they don't use the dog bed because they can be up here on the couch where there's more status. Well, once you take away the couch, that dog bed becomes a lot more appealing. Go to Groupon, get a bigger dog bed so you can get both dogs on it. Make sure it's a light color, like a light cream, a white, or a light gray, and no pattern on it. And I prefer the ones that are just solid without the sides and the back or the duvet covered. It's a foam, so you can unzip it and wash it. I have big dogs, they get things dirty a lot. The guardians need to eat something before they feed the dogs. Right now, their dogs are free feeding, which is a big problem, especially for these 2 dogs. So I would feed, he's older than she is, correct? She's older. Okay. So what I would do is put the food in the kitchen and put a sectional something to block the access. Then the human who's feeding them eats something first and 5 more bites. If you're going to eat a real meal, that's better. But if it's inconvenient, just get a chip or a cracker or a carrot or something like that. Eat 5 more bites. Then have her come over and use passive training for that. When she comes over, maybe her word is a meal, because her name is Maya. Well, they're both M dog names. But she comes over and you say feast. Every time for the 2 months that she takes her first bite of food, you say the word feast. After a while, when we say feast, the context is every time I hear feast, there's food in my mouth. So feast means eat. But to him, it doesn't mean anything because he hears feast and there's no food in his mouth. When she's done eating, she has to leave the area. Then he's allowed to come in the kitchen. And he gets 3 minutes. Both dogs get 3 minutes to eat. As soon as they address their bowl, the clock starts. As soon as they walk more than 4 feet away, we pick up the bowl, dump the food out, and put the empty bowl back down. It's important to put the empty bowl back down. And eventually we get to the point where we're back on the laser. Be careful she doesn't put it in her eye. So eventually it'll take a little bit of time, but eventually you can cue the dogs one at a time, and the dogs will practice staying out of the room. We need the dogs to develop self-control. So I like to look for ways to delay gratification, waiting for permission to eat food when I really want to eat food. Now these dogs are grazers, and Maya had some issues when she was younger, and the guardian's a little bit nervous, I can tell already, about pulling the food away. And we always think that we'll give them more access to food. And study after study after study shows the more access dogs have to food, the less involved they are to eat. If you think about it yourself, if you're on a diet, you pine for pizza or a cheeseburger or the chips or the soda or whatever it is that you're not allowed to have. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. So now she's going to probably for a day or two be like, I'm not eating, you're telling me to eat. Well, we're giving her a chance to eat 3 times a day, twice a day, whatever's convenient. And if you don't want to eat and you walk away, that's on your tab, not on my tab. I'm giving you the opportunity to eat. Don't doctor the food either. And eventually you get to the point, if it goes longer than 2 days, like I said, call me and she doesn't eat, but I would give her an opportunity to present the food twice a day. And if she doesn't, it goes back in the bag and the empty food bowl is back on the ground. Let me see, what else? We went over counter conditioning for the knocks at the doorbell and for the keys too. We did it for really 2 capacities, for separation anxiety as well as to stop them from barking. Because we have a little one, and when little ones are sleeping, parents really like it when the dogs do not wake them up. So for the counter conditioning, I mentioned making a list, but do the same sort of thing. Every time they bark and there's a sound outside, make note of what that sound is. So if every time the neighbor starts at their lawnmower and that's a sound, well then we can ask the neighbor, hey, would you mind starting and stopping that a couple times when we have a baby? Here's something to go to Apple Jacks or a gift certificate or something, whatever you have to do for your neighbors. But basically you help the dog. When we're doing the counter conditioning, they need to have the treat being delivered first, then the stimulus happens. And we have to be far enough away where the dog doesn't perceive it to be a threat. So you might actually have to do it where your neighbor is putting the lawnmower on in the front yard and you're in the backyard delivering a treat. Now, if you forget how to do the counter conditioning, message me. I have a ton of videos where I could share with you where it goes through it step by step. All right, I'm trying to think. Anything else that you want me to go over that I'm forgetting?
I don't think
No?
so.
All right. It's Mara, right?
Maru.
See, I keep on forgetting. And this is unusual because usually dogs have repeatable names. That's the first Maru I ever met. And this is Maru over there. And Maya's around here somewhere. She's probably hiding from me. She's not happy that she couldn't get treats. Oh, one last thing. When the baby's eating, use that as an opportunity for practice. So I would maybe put your cardboard box up and then put the high chair there and don't allow the dogs into the room. And again, have them practice not going there. And when you're done and you pick her up, if you want them to go clean it up, that's fine. I would come up and when they take the first bite, I would say, maid service, or whatever the word is that means, I prefer one-word commands, but housekeeping. And so every time you say housekeeping and the dogs run over and clean it, that would be funny. The guardian's laughing right now. But again, now if you have house guests, you say housekeeping and then you run over there, your guests are going to think that's funny. The dogs are going to perceive that they are making people happy. Now the dogs will emulate that behavior a little bit more. All right, well, this is Maru and Maya around here somewhere, and this is their roadmap to success. There she is. Remember, everything you do trains your dog, only sometimes you may not.